afternoon. It's great to virtually see you. Welcome to our Positive Links speaker series session, The Person You Mean to Be, presented by the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan, Stephen M. Ross School of Business. I'm Jane Dutton. I'm a faculty member at the Michigan Business School, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Center for Positive Organizations. I'm going to just give you a couple of technical notes about the technology we're using today. During today's event, attendees are view-only participants and cannot be seen or heard. We've turned off the chat, the question and answers, and the raise hand features. We've enabled live transcription services for event. This feature can be turned on or off using the Zoom settings at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, we are recording this event and will post the video on the CPO website as soon as we are able. The Center for Positive Organizations thanks the Sanger Leadership Center, the Tauber Institute for Global Operations, the Samuel Zell and Robert H. Lurie Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies, Lisa and David Drews, and Diane and Paul Jones for their sponsorship and their support of the 2010-2021 Positive Links Speaker Series. We also thank our series promotional partners, Ann Arbor Spark and the Management and Organizational Cognition Division of the Academy of Management. Now, let me introduce our wonderful speaker. I am so delighted. I've been waiting for years, actually, for the chance to interview and spend time with Dolly Chugh for many years. She's known within my field as one of the most exciting, creative, generous, and frame-breaking scholars of this generation. If you look up her record, you'll see since Dolly graduated from her PhD from Harvard, she joined the faculty at NYU's Stern School of Business, where she has an extraordinary record of productivity and impact. I love the banner on her brand as a faculty member, that she studies the social psychology of good people. This is such a worthy and could not be more important focus. Dolly is a prolific scholar who has added deeply to our understanding of everyday constraints on our ethical decision-making, which has brought forth the powerful idea of bounded ethicality. She's also an extraordinary teacher, winning prestigious awards at NYU. Personally, I've been moved by her dedication to teaching and running a book club in a men's prison through the NYU Prison Education Program at the Wallkill Correctional Facility. Now, you may know Dolly for her academic research or her best-selling book, or perhaps you know Dolly because of her highly acclaimed TED Talk on how to let go of being a good person and become a better person. Perhaps you know her because of her monthly column about race, gender, diversity and inclusion and bias that appears in Forbes.com. Or maybe you first caught a glimpse of her ideas during her interviews on MSNBC, her New York Times op-ed, or through reading her work on Harvard Business Review. Dolly's published in all the top journals in our field, but in my mind, even more importantly, she's making every effort to get her ideas out to as many people as possible through conventional and unconventional means. In my mind, Dolly is the sort of scholar who is creating a new model of how to be a responsible and highly impactful academic, who is a role model for people inside and outside the academy. I've loved her first book, The Person You Mean to Be, How Good People Fight Bias, which we're going to talk quite a bit about during our conversation today. But I also can't wait to read her next book, which is titled How to Heal a Nation. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dolly Chugh.
Goodness, Jane, thank you. That was so nice. I'm like crying.
It was a long intro, but I had a lot to say, Dolly. I wanted to make sure that people could fully appreciate who you are and what you're bringing to our conversation. And as we talked about, Dolly, I wanted to start our conversation on a little bit of a more personal note and how this work kind of fits into the context of your life. So I wondered if you could just for a moment describe yourself as a young woman in terms of how this work connected to your younger self.
Oh, that's fun. Well, first, thank you to all the organizers for having me. This is really exciting. And this isn't just any talk for me. It's a bucket list talk, talking to an academic idol, Jane Dutton, and at an institution that has such a great reputation for helping us move in positive directions through scholarship and teaching. So thank you for having me. Jane, when I was in, I believe it was kindergarten, my parents got a phone call from my teacher saying that, everything's fine. Immigrant parents, new to the country. We were living in West Texas. Of course, teacher calls, there's worry. Everything's fine. However, it appears that Dolly thinks she's the teacher here in class. And then I would sort of finish my reading or activity or whatever we were doing, and then sort of round up kids around me so we could have our own little mini class in class. And when my mom tells that story, I flash back to that idolization I had for teachers, and for they seem to know so much. I now know as a teacher, they were learning as much as we were day to day. But that identity was one that I've always gravitated towards, the opportunity to teach and learn and be in spaces where teaching and learning is at the center. And so it took me a while. This is a second career for me. I was in corporate life and consulting and investment banking. I did other things, but I think I found my way into a path where that identity is back in the center, and I don't just have to sort of hijack my teacher's class. I can kind of just.
Yeah, you've got your own.
I got my own, yeah.
Well, that probably fits right into the next question, which I've already said, to me at least, I think you're carving this really unique, important path as an academic. So I wondered how you understand and describe what you're trying to do in the world. And I'm sure it has part of that teacher voice.
Yeah, and I think, my one word why, if I were to put a one word on it, would be better. Like, just try to be better than you were the day before, try to make things better, try to leave spaces better, try to leave people better, just move things in a better direction, wherever you are, whatever you've messed up. And I think that's where a lot of my research interests come from, and sort of a lot of it's, that saying about research being me search. I think there's a lot of me trying to figure out how to make myself better. And the younger version of me, I think often felt like I was trying to understand things from the outside. Like I was just sort of not quite squarely fitting into communities. I'm not Black, I'm not white. I'm Indian American, but I don't know, sometimes with Indians, I'm not Indian enough. With Americans, I'm not American enough. I'm sort of both, but neither. So there's always been this interest in kind of understanding that and taking an observer's stance to that. And then once I made my way into the career of being an academic, where we had tools and methods, and we had ways of studying things empirically, it became clearer to me how I could understand my younger self and my current self and the world around me, and sort of nudge it all towards something better.
Yeah. Well, I love the way you're describing yourself, because it helps me understand a little bit the voice that you use in the book. And I just have to hold up the book just so people can say, this book is totally awesome. I have read a lot of Dolly's academic work and her newsletter. I'm a fan of her newsletter, which we're going to get to, but I hadn't, until I was preparing for this talk, had the chance to read this book. This is a book not to miss that is so important for these times. And we're going to talk a little bit about the voice that you use in the book, because I think it relates to what you were saying about not fitting, and therefore in some sense fitting with everyone, because you don't fit neatly kind of into one box. But tell us more about the origins of this book. Where did the seeds from this book arise? I mean, you did mention that, you becoming is something that you really care, getting better is something that you care about, but I'd love to hear more about the origins of this book.
Yeah, the book, I can actually pinpoint two very specific moments where this book was born. I think the idea of writing a book was something I always thought was sort of something magical people did. And then I became an academic and I realized I knew some magical people who were writing books. And so it started to feel more like I could actually move towards that. But then this book being the book, the two moments, one was, I actually described this moment at the beginning of the book where I, through social media, had been following the Black Lives Matter movement pretty closely and noticing there was a real discrepancy between what I was seeing on social media and what I was seeing in the news, like on TV. That basically it just wasn't being covered on the news, or I'm going back to like 2014-ish. And what was being covered seemed very different. Like it was being portrayed very violent, and that was not what I was seeing on social media at all. And I finally, when Tamir Rice, who was a very young boy, was not too much older than my own children, was playing in the park and playing with a toy gun and got shot by police for nothing, and killed. I finally felt like, while I'm not a protester and I've never identified as a protester and I've never been to a protest, that it's time to go from just watching this on social media to actually showing up. And so I kind of rallied together my husband and some friends, and we went to this Black Lives Matter protest in New York City. And the way it worked was you show up, but you don't know where it's going to go. And so you follow. This is incredibly well organized group of 100 young people, let's say, and just so disciplined and intentional and intelligent, and it just very impressive. And us old folks were sort of joining in and following along. And where it went was the Toys R Us that used to be in Times Square in New York City, which is this huge flagship store. Tourists like flooded. It was December. It was the holiday shopping season. It was crowded. And the goal was to go up the escalators. It was like 4 or 5 floors, I think, to the top floor, because that's where the toy gun section was. And there we staged a die-in, where we lay on the ground as if we had been shot next to the toy guns. And there's 100 people laying on the ground.
Wow.
And holiday music was playing through the sound system. And I remember feeling terrified. There was nothing to be terrified of, in the sense that, like, this protest was, like, the vast majority of Black Lives Matter protests, incredibly peaceful, and yet still just feeling like, I don't think I'm cut out for this. Like, this is scary. But is there no other way to be involved? Is there no other path to supporting this work? And as I lay there, the thought that went through my head is, I wish there was a book that would tell me what to do if I'm a semi-bold person. I need a path towards doing my part, not being passive. And so in that moment, I remember thinking, there's got to be a book, or maybe there's a book in me that speaks to that need. And then a few months later, I was asked to give a talk, as we often are as professors, to a student group. It was for something called Ally Week, and allyship, speaking to the idea of when you're not part of an affected group, but you are supporting and advocating for that group, you're an ally of that group. And Ally Week was a week of programming on that subject, and I was asked to do the keynote for the first day of the week. And I said yes to it whenever, was asked a month in advance or something. Everything sounds like a good idea a month in advance. I was like, sure, yeah, I'll give that keynote. And then, like, the night before, I'm preparing it, and I'm like, I don't think I know anything about allyship. I'm like Googling scholarship and allyship. Not much is coming up. And I had this moment of panic that they think I know something about this and I don't. And I started just drawing and doodling on a notepad and allyship. And then I started realizing, well, implicit bias, I studied that. And, there's really good research that I'm fascinated by on colorblindness. And I know about that research. And I just started realizing all these strands of research that I have been part of or am fascinated by, all tied to this topic of allyship. And boom, that was the insight. That's a book. Like putting all of this into one place is that book I wanted to read. And I actually know about all these things, so maybe I could be the one to write the book I want to read. And eventually, it came to be.
It did come to be. I mean, and it came to be in some sense just at the right time.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful thing too. So what are given that those two sort of momentous prompts to do this book, what are some of the things that you most want people to take from this book? We're going to get into some of the specifics, but at a high level, and in particular, I love the distinction that you make between a good person and a goodish person. So I'm hoping when you talk about what you think you want people to get out of it, that you can touch on that theme.
Yes, I love that you brought that up, because for me, that is the takeaway, is this distinction between this identity that a lot of us really like clench and hold close, of being a good person. We care deeply about it. There's research on moral identity that says on a 1 to 7 scale, a lot of us would say 4, 5, 6, 7, that we want to be seen as a good person. We want to feel like a good person. We may define good person differently. In fact, we know for a fact there are many definitions out there of what that is, but we care about defending that identity, and the incredibly nimble mental gymnastics that our brains all do will find a way to see ourselves as a good person when challenged. And that good person identity is really a barrier to that, our goal of seeing where there's moments of learning that are possible. And because we know through the last 50 years of research, 3 Nobel Prizes, Thaler, Kahneman, Simon, much of the mind's work happens outside of our conscious awareness. All those autopilot shortcuts that keep our minds going sometimes we are doing things, we are acting in ways, we are ignoring things, we are condoning things that are not what we would put in that good person definition. Mm. And so when we're confronted with that, we clench harder, because we got to defend that identity rather than sort of opening up to the possibility that there might be a moment of learning there. And so what I've been proposing is the goodish approach rather than the good person. This largely builds on Carol Dweck's research, Carol Dweck and colleagues' research on fixed mindset, good person, nothing to learn here, nothing to grow, I've already know this, versus growth mindset, goodish person, I am a work in progress. I am always getting better, no matter where I started, whether I started here or here. According to studies, brain scans, they show that when people are in a growth mindset or a goodish mindset, we're more, we actually show more brain activity when a mistake is pointed out to us. In fixed mindset, we actually pull away. We see less brain activity. I mean, that was on math problems, that study, but I'd argue the same would hold here, that as goodish people, we're going to be more open to, I didn't know that word is got a problematic history, or wow, I really, I'm taking me as, I just confused 2 Black students for each other who look nothing alike. They're like a foot difference in height and different skin tones and completely different people. And I've confused them for each other. And that's revealed something about the shortcuts I was using my mind to keep track of all my students. My voice has been fine all day. I don't know what just happened.
Well, I think you're getting excited because this
excitement,
is the point.
Exactly. So it's good. What I've really been pushing towards is this idea of being goodish is not a lower standard than good person. It's actually higher. And the reason it's higher is that we're accountable. We're growing all the time. We're not just sort of resting on the laurels of I'm a good person. We're if I look back a year ago, there's things that TV shows I watched a year ago that now I look at and I'm like, that makes me wince, because I've learned something about ableism in the last year, and I see what's problematic now, and that could make me feel shameful and make me retreat and make me deny that, but I actually feel proud that I'm getting better. That's the goal.
Yeah, no, I love I've adopted that ever since I read it. This idea of a good, goodish, good enough, or not good enough, but on my way to being better.
I think that's right. That's good enough suggests that I'm sort of done. Whereas here, I think it's like it's more dynamic.
Yeah. And I love I mean, I thought one of the points that you made in the book that was so important was about, again, when we don't make ourselves on a journey, again, how we become so self-judgmental and we feel threatened. And so we put all these barriers up to learning. And it is a
Yes.
journey. And I mean, I can hear in your voice, which is very much in the book, again, this voice of humility, because you use yourself so often in the book and your own imperfections on your way
There was a
in
lot of
this journey.
material there.
Yeah, well, it just makes it easier to absorb
Yeah.
and take in kind of how you're teaching us. If I think about, again, your role as a teacher. Um, and you also make, as again, as a high level, before we get into the specifics, so the importance about this other work that you've done with other scholars as well, about this idea of bounded ethicality. Can you explain to us what that is, and again, why that's important to your story?
Yeah, absolutely. With Max Bazerman, Mahzreen Banaji, and Molly Kern, and a later iteration, we were interested in bounded rationality, which is a very seminal concept in the social sciences that is very widely accepted as a way of understanding the human mind has systematic constraints to how fast it can process things, how much it can store, the accuracy of decisions, and there's been lots of research, those Nobel prizes I was referring to, that have helped us see systematically what are sometimes the errors we make as a result of those systematic constraints. And I don't think there's much controversy over that reality that sometimes you're going to sort of remember the first person you interviewed in a long day of interviewing job candidates. The first person and the last person are going to stick out in your mind more than the people in the middle. That's an example of bounded rationality and the heuristics we depend on. So that led to a thought of, well, this brain is the same brain, the brain that's deciding what cereal to buy and what investment to make. It's the same brain that's deciding who to hire. It's the same brain that's deciding what's appropriate to joke about and what's not. It's the same brain that's you know attributing blame in a sexual assault case. And so why would this brain, when it comes to these ethical or morally charged issues, somehow not be prone to those systematic constraints? How would it somehow magically have limitless abilities? And so the bounded rationality, we just took that idea and moved it to become bounded ethicality, and to focus on that set of decision making errors that we can make sometimes, one of which sits in the kinds of unconscious bias errors that we can sometimes make, where we are unconsciously creating stereotypes, and letting them affect our behaviors and our decisions. And so bounded ethicality is it's a little bit of a nerdy spin-off. If you don't know bounded rationality, I'm not sure bounded ethicality sort of packs the same semantic weight, but if you do, it sort of allows people to kind of borrow that understanding and bring it into this domain.
Yeah, I think, Dolly, it's, for me, I really like the idea also because it's not only, again, that it makes me less hard on myself, but it also makes me less judgmental of others, that we're all operating, within these constraints. And again, assuming that we're all trying to move towards goodish,
Right.
and better, then perhaps, again, not that I overlook where other people, you know, falter, but I am forgiving of that and I'm understanding of it and realizing they're on a journey too. So I feel like it's got this dual value in terms of understanding my own constraints, but also understanding the constraints of others, and therefore willing to maybe interact with them more than I would if I didn't imagine they were bounded just like me.
Interesting. Yeah, and I feel like that's so on brand for Jane Dutton, that sort of compassionate response is sort of what it elicits. I think it's different for different people where that understanding leads them. My goal is that, I've been calling this psychological literacy, this idea that if we better understand how the human mind works, we will be less likely to build systems and create situations where we just assume we can count on, well, he's a good person, so there's no way he could have done that.
Mhm.
Or how dare you say that you didn't feel included in my community? I'm like, rather than being willing to listen to those who are telling us that just because it's not raining where you are, it doesn't mean it's not raining where I am. And so,
Yeah.
I think I love that you're able to take that, and I think some people are able to take more judgment, not less, out of it as well.
Hmm. Well, now we're going to go on to what I think I'm imagining a lot of people are really interested in. That is like, so Dolly, what do we do about this?
Right.
We are bounded, we have got the growth mindset, but we are incredibly flawed in our ability to live up to what we hope. And you talk about this distinction between a believer and a builder.
Yeah.
And so I would love to have you let's start to unpack some of the practical implications of what can we do
Yep.
to become more of the person we mean to be. So
Absolutely.
maybe
Absolutely.
starting with what's a builder, what's a believer, and why should we try to move towards being a builder?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about that this book is written for people who already coming into the book believe in diversity, inclusion, believe that bias exists, that is prejudice exists against Black people in the United States. Like, if you don't already know that and believe that, then this book isn't going to convince you. This book is going to be more sort of deepening your knowledge and taking you, as you said, to what do I do about it, which is the building stage. Because it turns out just believing in those values and not acting on it does nothing other than reinforce the status quo. And that's been a big insight for me to realize that I can't simply believe or just post something. I need to act. And what I wanted to do was give a toolkit for that building piece. How do I build the skills, build the tools, build the communities, build the organizations, the teams, the courage, all those things. And so the continuum, and I wish in the book I had done a better job describing it as a continuum, because you just did, and I loved how you did it. And I got feedback afterwards that I made it sound like you either are a believer or you are a builder, like dichotomous, when in fact it is exactly that, this journey. As we move towards being a builder, like some of the simple things we can do, there were about 40 interviews I did for the book, and I heard so many great examples of what people are doing. And so these are just a few of them, and there's a lot more in the book. One of them was run better meetings, whether that's on Zoom or whatever your virtual platform is, or in person. The idea was whatever's happening in your meetings is just a microcosm of what's happening in the organization, whether it's your company or your nonprofit, or your school, your religious organization. And whoever's being talked over, whoever's not being sort of credited for their work, whoever's being judged as overly emotional or angry, if that's happening in your meeting, that's happening in your larger organization. So by doing the things that we just know are better for meetings in general, balancing airtime, ensuring multiple perspectives are brought upon issues, being fair in how we treat people and credit people, these are just basic meeting 101 things. It turns out that has this double benefit of also fostering diversity and inclusion. So it can start with just, and this is actually much easier in some ways to do on virtual platforms than it is in the real world. Like, you can literally just keep a little tally sheet of who's talking, how much people are talking. Some platforms actually track it for you. We can watch nonverbals a little more and see, again, a little easier in these platforms than in real life, where you're sort of constantly having to stare at people. And notice wow, that looked like that didn't land right with that person. What am I missing that they're not missing? That's something's not landing right. And so we can, whether we're running the meeting or just participating in the meeting, we can be a little more active and saying, I'm sorry, I need to go back because Jane got interrupted earlier and I needed to hear what she was going to say, or thanks so and so. That sounds like exactly what Jane said last week. So I'm glad you brought her idea back into the conversation, et cetera. And so running better meetings, having better meetings, participating in better meetings is one thing we can do. A second thing we can do, I tell a story in the book about two collaborators who were working together, Sarah Weeks and Geetha Varadarajan. And Sarah was uncomfortable, did not know how to say Geetha's multi-syllable South Indian last name. And so would hesitate to, like, when introducing her to another colleague, would be hesitant to say her name. And this one day kind of came into visibility in a conversation they were having, that they're actually writers, and they were talking about a fictional character who wasn't saying someone's last name. And Geetha commented that she thought the reason they weren't saying that character's last name was because they were arrogant. And Sarah was like, does she think I'm arrogant that I'm not saying her last name? So this led to this like open conversation. And where it sort of leads in my book is this idea that there's a lot of names we don't say because we just haven't tried, or we haven't put in the minute to Google how to say the name. It turns out there's lots of resources online. What I notice as a teacher is that when I don't know how to say a student's name, I hesitate to call on them. I'm embarrassed to say. And it's even worse because the names I don't know how to say tend to be the backgrounds that are different than my own, right? So talk about the anti-diversity and inclusion move. So simply taking 5 names you don't know how to say, neighbors, could be even family members, community members, coworkers, and ask them, or if you're uncomfortable asking them, spend a little time on the internet and just learn how to say their names and say them. Don't nickname them when they haven't asked to be nicknamed. Don't shorten them. Don't just point at them. Learn how to say their names. This is something I've been working a lot on, and I'm no Meryl Streep. I can't do accents. Like, I'm sure I'm still not saying the names like a native would, but I'm doing better at I think, at making the right syllables emphasized, and letters that should be silent, making them silent, things like that. So that's a second move. And then the third thing that I think is well suited for the lives many of us are leading in 2021 is to audit your media consumption, whatever it is you consume: podcasts, books, movies, TV shows, whatever it is. Take the last 10 you consumed, just write them out and look at how much similarity is there within the 10 of the voices that are centered, whether it's the creator's voice or the character's voices, and how much similarity in those voices is there to your own experience and background, and see if there's a way to kind of expand what experiences. There's so much wonderful content out there in every genre, in every medium. Allow yourself to experience more of that, but also break out of the tendency that we have to hear the same voices. And this isn't this is going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but we were rearranging some bookshelves recently, and my books tend to be just all over the place, not organized by genre. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have a memoir section, and I'm going to do it. So I go and I like put together the memoir section, and I'm like proudly looking at all these memoirs I've read and like patting myself on the back. And then I realized there's no women on that shelf. Like, how is it I'm only reading memoirs by men? How did this happen? And there's probably more published about men and by men, but also there are plenty I could read. So in the last year I've made a very conscious choice to change that, and it's been wonderful content out there that I wasn't kind of breaking through the mainstream and the algorithms and all that to see.
Yeah,
So 3 ideas.
that was one of the specific things that reading in your book that you alerted me to. And so I started subscribing and following people on Twitter
Oh
that I
yeah.
wouldn't have normally followed, because I realize I'm just reproducing myself or people who are in agreement with me, and I'm not able to see different ways. So that
Yes.
was
And thank you
really,
for bringing that up. When we said, the way I say content, I should have said social media. That's the perfect example. Thank you, Jane.
yeah. And so, oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to go with. Um, you make so many interesting points in the book, and I'm I often think, as part of my awakening, I would say in the last two years or so, you know, late to the game in terms of really understanding more of my privilege, what my privilege is doing, and my experience of it. And you make this kind of strong assertion that ordinary privilege is a secret weapon.
Mm,
It's kind of one of your phrases.
yeah.
And can you talk to us more about and how we might think about ordinary privilege as a secret weapon?
Yeah, we are missing such a great opportunity here. There's so much like controversy over the word privilege and how dare you and shame and I feel awful, and what we're missing in all that is that the areas in which we have, some tailwinds in our life, whether, in my case, I'm straight, and so I have all these tailwinds where I don't have to think about, is this employer going to be a safe place for me, or does this state have laws that allow me the rights I deserve? There's all these ways in which I have ease in that dimension of my identity. It turns out, so fine, I've got the privilege. With studies, a number of studies show, they're by Margot Monteith and Alexander Zopp and uh, Stephanie Johnson, David Heckman, and others. There's been a whole bunch of studies that show that when let's just do an example. Someone tells a racist joke. White person says, hey, that's not cool, versus black person says, hey, that's not cool, to the white person who told the racist joke.
Mm-hmm.
What the studies say is that when the black person says it, controlling for all the things, they're more likely to be viewed as rude and whiny. And when the white person says it, they're more likely to be persuasive. And so this is an example of when you've got the tailwind or the privilege, you've actually got influence. So you might think, well, it's not my place to say something. I should stay out of this. But in fact, it's just the opposite. Not that you should speak over people or instead of people, and certainly not and over people who are directly affected. But when there is a moment where there could be silence versus nothing, or silence versus you doing something, there is absolutely the opportunity to use that secret weapon you have, which is your tailwind, your privilege. And I didn't know that research until I was writing this book. I was, really stunned I think I'd seen a study here or there, but to really see the body of work and realize that so many of us are sort of walking around in this cone of shame instead of saying, oh, thank goodness I figured out where my privilege is. That means I now figure out where my influence is.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's a really different way of thinking about, again, moving on our path towards goodish.
Yeah.
I wanted to zoom in a bit on your advice about what you would tell us about being better at noticing our biases and privileges, because there are so many blind spots. And again, especially if we're surrounding ourselves with people who are similarly biased
Yeah.
and privileged. So can you talk to us a little bit more about, I think you call it for willful awareness,
Right.
in your
Right.
book. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And I loved what you shared a moment ago about, an awakening. I think we've all got different awakenings on these issues in our lives, and it's usually around the identities where we have some tailwinds. There's these studies that say that they looked at they simulated when you're going through an airport and the security, the folks working security are looking at the scanners of our carry-on bags. And what they found was that if they told people there was a higher prevalence of dangerous objects to be found, they were more likely to find the dangerous objects. In other words, when they told them there was a low prevalence, things slipped by. They saw it, but it literally, like, they saw it, but they didn't see it. It literally just went by. And so there's this idea that if we know there's something to look for, we're more likely to see it when it's right in front of us. And when we don't think there's something to look for, we could look right at it and not notice it. Or, also the phenomenon of, like, when you open the fridge and you're like, how come no one told me that we were out of butter? No one put butter on the grocery list. And then, your roommate or your kid comes up behind you, you're like, you mean right there, Mom, right in front of you? Oh, yeah, I got it. So our noticing skills are something that we can't just assume that we're seeing things just because they're in front of us, or we can't just assume because we're not seeing it that it's not in front of us. And there's I can't remember if I included this in the book or not, but it's always in my mind every semester. I had assigned a reading that's like a classic in our field and written by a very famous scholar. And every semester I reread what I assigned to students. I'm rereading the pre-work at the same time they are. And so I reread it for the millionth time. And then I get an email from a student who I consider to be a real, like, star in the class, just makes everything better in the classroom, and very conscientious. And it starts off with, dear Professor Chugh, I'm really loving the class, good start. But then gets to so I was really surprised you assigned such a sexist reading for this week. And I was like, how dare she? What? And I started, like, that red zone defensive response.
Totally.
You never should send. But I'm like, obviously she's mistaken. I don't know who she thinks she's talking to here, and I'm like, I'm a feminist and I'm raising feminist daughters, and that's a classic in my field. And so I flip it open to take a look, and just to show her how misguided she is. And I read the passage and I'm like, oh, how did that suddenly, this thing about women being shoppers, how did that become part of this article? But obviously it was always in the article and I had read it a million times, but it had just, I wasn't noticing it. It's so normalized that it just went right over my head. And I think that's, with Black Lives Matter, that's what's happened for a lot of people in the last year, is a lot of things have been right in front of us and we weren't noticing them. And so part of being a better noticer is like making an intentional effort to be a better noticer. Like that's part of just trust the people who are telling you there's something to notice, and then you're more likely to notice it.
Yeah, I mean, your example also, your example where it's the student that's pointing it out to us, again, makes, in my mind, it's so important to think about what's the community around us and how empowered are they to speak or to disagree. And I was just thinking about Adam Grant's new book, Think Again, because I mean, that's, as I'm seeing it, one of his big points is that you don't want to surround yourself, with the yesers. You want to make sure that there's dissent, and part of this dissent, constructive dissent, is helping us see our own biases and our own blind spots. So
agreed.
Yeah, I didn't put this down when we talked about questions, but it just arises in this conversation. So how do we think about building communities where we lift each other up in these capacities? Yeah. So it's not just on me to be goodish or to move closer towards goodish, but as a collective, we are moving towards goodish.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's actually something you said earlier in the conversation, when you were describing that the voice I write in is one in which I share some of my own mishaps. That's a really conscious choice. It was sort of mortifying, in the writing process, but what I was trying to do is what teachers often do and students often do for each other, which is they make their learning visible to others, right? It's sort of the show your work rule of thumb. And to me, that's, first of all, it breaks you out of this, like, internal shame spiral, which usually lends itself to nothing productive. But it also makes it possible for us to learn from each other. So I think the way we build communities is we start talking about what we're learning. I don't think it's as effective to like preach at others what we're learning as much as sort of say, um, I used the word gypsy in class, or no, not gypsy. Sorry, I used the word gypped in class recently, and a student came up to me afterwards and said, that word has a really problematic racial history. I didn't know that, and I looked it up afterwards and was like thankful that I'm flashed back to all the times I've used that word and not realized what I was saying. And so I think this idea of let's keep telling each other about our mistakes and then saying, and so then, wow, that's good to know. And I wonder what other words I'm not aware of. What words do you know of? And there was an interesting conversation just when we were prepping for this discussion, in our sort of tech check, we had a conversation going on along those lines. So I think the idea that if we're willing to make ourselves visible and vulnerable to others, they will do the same. And boom, you've got a community. And that could be your roommate, it could be a family member, it could be a colleague. It can be literally anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me hopeful and frightened at the same time, because I just think, as we've learned about psychological safety and all these other things that are so critical, but in some ways fragile, for people to be able to really speak that. I mean, it says a lot to me about the classroom setting that you're creating, that it's safe to do that. Because I know even for myself, when as a senior person, even like when I had already announced I was going to retire, I had nothing at risk. I still found myself holding back on some of these issues around diversity because just afraid of the blowback, afraid of people misunderstanding my intentions.
Yes.
So it does feel.
I agree. No, I relate to that. I totally relate to. I still feel that way all the time. There's a million opportunities I don't take that I could.
Yeah. I don't know. Oh, go ahead, Dal. Sorry.
Well, one of the things I've written about is this 10% more rule.
Oh, good. We're going to get to your newsletter. Let's keep going.
Good. So let's talk about that.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I have this newsletter called Dear Good People, and it comes out once a month. It's like a 5 or 10 minute read once a month. And the first issue, which I ended up starting, my publisher had been asking me for a while to start this newsletter, and I kept saying, okay, next month. This like went on for a couple of years. And I finally started it after George Floyd was murdered, and there was this, sudden swell of interest. My inbox was exploding in understanding more about these issues. And I, like many, grew very fearful that people were going to sprint hard in the month of June 2020. And then by July, we were going to have lost everyone's interest. And in fact, people will be like, well, check that box. I guess we're done, And so I wrote this that's when I finally wrote the newsletter, because I wanted to address that issue. And I called it the 10% more rule, the first issue. And the idea was, if you're new to these issues, if you're just kind of coming into whatever the issue is, racism, sexism, ableism, if that issue is new to you, or either you didn't think it was a problem before, or you thought it was someone else's problem or whatever, or you thought it was a problem that got solved already, then 10%, be 10% more mortified. Because right now you're seeing things you didn't see before in yourself or in the world around you, and you might shut down, or you might like get 100% more interested, and then that's it, you fade away. 10%, according, like, I picked that number because goal setting researchers tell us we need, attainable but challenging goals. And I think 10% more than you were doing before feels like that. So 10% more mortified. If you're someone who's been aware of these issues, and maybe you've hashtagged, or you've donated, or you volunteered, like, you haven't been completely unaware. maybe now it's time to be 10% more terrified. And the terrified means now it's like it's a little more risk. Maybe it's time to ask that question,
Mhm.
or share that learning, make yourself vulnerable, or show up at that meeting, the affinity group meeting. And if you were in a basketball game, it'd be like it's time to come off the bench and take a foul or two in the game. And then if you've been playing the whole game, if you're exhausted, if you're on the front lines of this, it's the work you do every day, or your identity makes it unavoidable for you to deal with these issues every day. 10% more might be quote unquote, air quotes, satisfied.
Mm.
Not that the work is done, but satisfied that you don't have to play every minute of the game. It might mean coming out and breathing and letting others do some of the work, and then know that you can come back when you're ready, when you've caught your breath. So this 10% more rule, I think, is a place to start with. We don't, many opportunities slip by for us to make things better around us, and to make things better in us.
Mm.
But let's do 10% more than we did before.
Yeah, I mean, that recommendation is so powerful, and it's just to give you a nibble, a taste of what's in this newsletter. Your newsletter is one I've forwarded to more people, I think, than
Oh,
anything I've gotten in the last year.
oh, I'm
It's
so
just so
glad.
useful. So talk to us more. So that's one.
Yeah.
I wrote down several of the ones that I thought people might be. I think there's one that you say 5 ways you can respond when people post racial stuff
Racist stuff online. Yeah.
online. Like, what do you do? I mean, that there's another one on 15 tips for inclusive meetings, and I think you gave us some of those things. One of my
Yeah.
favorite newsletters were all these hints about bringing joy
Oh, yeah.
to your life. So talk to us. Can you? I don't know if you can remember off the top of your head the 5 ways. I didn't ask you to prepare for that, but talk to us more about some of these bite-sized bits that
Yeah.
that are in these newsletters, and how do you decide what to put in a newsletter?
Got it. Yeah. So, well, I'll first say that everything you just said, the past newsletters are all on my website, and thank you very much for posting that in the chat. So you can just go on the website and read them. You don't have to sign up for anything. It's right there. If you would like to get them in your inbox going forward, then you have to sign up. And the 5 ways to respond to racist things people post online. I introduced the 20-60-20 rule, which I also write about in my book. And that talks about I know we're limited on time, so I won't walk through the whole thing, but one of the key takeaways is that we forget the 60% of people who aren't deeply engaged in an issue, and who will just kind of go where the norms go on an issue, that they're deeply influenceable. And we often get so riled up by, that uncle at the holiday meal who's saying all those racist things, that we forget the cousin who's sort of like deep in their soup, like, I don't know what's happening here, that, that there's a real opportunity to, while doing dishes. I mean, this is back when we had holiday meals, but you get my idea. The middle 60 is influenceable. And so the 20, that particular newsletter talked about online how to apply the 20-60-20 rule. How do I decide? I'm actually writing one today. I'm a little behind because they come out on the last Sunday of every month, and I kind of forgot February was a short month. And so I was just like, oh my God, last Sunday is like next weekend. So I write about whatever I'm learning about, in that moment, or whatever I'm grappling with. So it feels to me, unlike a book, which you write it and then 2 years later it comes out and you're sort of over it by then. Here it's like, what am I literally learning about right now? So like this weekend, I finished reading Chanel Miller, who was the victim of in the Stanford rape case. Her memoir, and I watched Promising Young Woman, which is a new movie about rape and sexual assault. And both of these things are sitting in my mind. I'm trying to untangle them. I'm trying to think about all the sort of myths I've absorbed that have perpetuated rape culture, even as a woman, in this culture. So I'm trying to untangle all that and write a newsletter about it. And I am often trying to I'm so glad you forwarded it to people, because what I'm trying to do is reach as many hearts and minds as possible. I mean, that's why it's free. It's just like, it's there. And I want to give people like an easy entry point into these issues, like bite-sized, science-based, evidence-based, but with like pop culture references, and lots of resources and links that people can click. And it makes me really happy when I see the link data that a lot of people are reading more. They're sort of using it as a conduit to more knowledge. So I write about what I'm trying to learn about, and try to bring everyone along with me.
Yeah, I'm just so grateful that you have this attitude. Again, this is sort of the epitome of the generosity and the humility in terms of how Dolly is doing this work that's so powerful. So I know we only just a couple of minutes, but I want to just come on, tell us a little bit about your new book, the book that you're working on. I know you said that the title might not say "How to Heal a Nation," but boy, is that a title that says, "How do you heal a nation?" Oh my gosh, who can take
I
on such
know.
a big topic?
I know. My editor has a lot of faith in me, don't you think? By that
Yeah.
title, I feel like she's wonderful. Yeah, that's, you can't read it, but that's the outline behind me. So if the first book was about like basically the psychologist's guide on how to grow from your own mistakes, that's one way to paraphrase what my first book was about. The second book is the psychologist's guide on how do we grow from the mistakes of the past. And a big part of that is intellectually. I think many of us are realizing that we didn't learn like a full, true story of American history. I talk a little bit about that in the first book. And so intellectually, we know, okay, I got to go like learn about the GI Bill, and I got to go learn this, I got to learn that, I got to unlearn stuff. Just because we intellectually know how to do that doesn't mean we psychologically and emotionally know how to do that. That's asking a lot of us psychologically and emotionally. Is that there's a lot of unlearning to do. Adam Grant's book Think Again is a wonderful a book about that topic. And so I focus specifically on how do we break through the defensiveness, the shame, the desire to look away, in order to do the unlearning we want to do, whether it's about Confederate statues or the land that we've stolen from Native Americans that we sit on. How do we navigate that emotional minefield? That's what I'm trying to curate research about.
Dolly, you amaze me. I can't. I mean, I keep those newsletters coming.
Oh, I
But
will.
also
Thank
we'll
you.
look forward to the book as well. And I just want to use this again as a opportunity to say thank you. Thank you for coming and spending this time with us. Thank you for your ideas and your amazing energy, just the way that you're being in the field. And I know that this is gonna build fandom for you, but more importantly, be an invitation for people to engage your work, both the past work you've done, but also importantly, what is coming out. And again, in my role as former convener and closer of this event, I want to thank you, and I want to also thank all of the attendees for coming. We had a wonderful group of people. Please know that we will put the video link on the CPO website, hopefully by tomorrow, so that you can forward that to other people and look at all the other wonderful positive links sessions that we've had this term. And also, as we've suggested, I think it came out in the chat, but it will also be linked to the email that you'll get, a link to the Dear Good People newsletter so that you can sign up. And again, as a member of the CPO community, this is our final positive links of the year. We're ending it early, a little bit early. We had a compressed season this year, but we'll really look forward to you coming back in the fall to when we do this again. But in the meantime, check out the Positive Business Conference. We have a Positive Business Conference that's happening in May that we would welcome you to attend. You can find out lots of information about that on our website as well. So I will use this as an occasion to say, have a great afternoon, and wishing you all the best. And again, thank you, Dolly.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. This was a bucket list item for me. What a dream. Thank you.